They always say the night shift at a hospital is the quietest, but that's only true if you're not paying attention. I learned that last Thursday, when I covered an overnight security shift at the old wing of St. Luke's, the wing they keep open just enough to justify not demolishing it, but never busy enough to feel alive. I'm not a superstitious guy. I work security because I like the calm, the way time stretches out and rooms feel yours alone. At least, that's how it was before last week. The second I stepped inside that wing, something was off. Hospitals always have that faint antiseptic smell. But here, it was mixed with a sour, metallic tang I couldn't place. Like blood, but older, stale, and buried under layers of bleach. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some flickering, casting sickly yellow on the cracked linoleum. It was colder than the rest of the building. I remember rubbing my palms together as I signed in at the security kiosk, the paper logbook curling at the corners, ink faded as if no one had written anything here for years. My rounds were straightforward. Walk the perimeter, check the doors, keep an eye on the handful of unused patient rooms, and the sealed-off surgery theater at the end of the hall. There were cameras, but the old monitors in the closet-sized office only showed blurry, colorless images. I tried not to stare at them too long. The shapes moved just enough to make you think someone was there, only for the screen to shudder and go blank for a second, like the building itself was blinking. The first hour dragged by in silence, broken only by the distant thrum of the hospital generator and the occasional squeak of my shoes on grime-smudged tiles. I tried distracting myself with my phone, but the signal barely reached this far. Instead, I paced, double-checking the doors, shining my flashlight into empty rooms that looked even emptier by the harsh beam. Each time I passed the old surgery, the heavy steel door seemed a little colder. There was a faded sign on it. "Do not enter. Under maintenance." The lock was rusting, but I tugged just to be sure. It held fast, but the metal vibrated, as if something on the other side had shifted. I told myself I was being jumpy because of the setting, because the silence made my own breath feel too loud. But then, around 1 a.m., I heard it. A shuffling, barely audible, somewhere near the nurse's station at the far end of the hallway. I stopped, listening. My pulse stuttered, as if the sound had startled my heart into missing a step. It wasn't footsteps exactly, more like the drag of fabric, or maybe paper scraping along tiles. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the corridor. No answer. Just the same shuffling, fading as I walked toward it. I switched off my flashlight to listen better, and in the dim ambient light, I could have sworn I saw something move past the open doorway. Not a person, but a shadow, thin and fluid, slipping along the wall. I snapped the flashlight back on, swept the beam across the nurse's station, but there was nothing. Just piles of old files, a toppled coffee cup, and my own breath fogging the air. I tried to laugh it off. Old buildings like this creak all the time. Maybe a draft, or a rat. Still, when I returned to the security office, I found myself locking the door behind me. Something I'd never done before. I sat in the brittle plastic chair, knees bouncing, and watched the monitors. That's when I saw it, on the grainy feed from the east corridor, a figure standing just outside the frame, so close you could almost see their face. They hovered at the very edge of the camera's vision, indistinct, just an outline, a suggestion of movement in the low-res blur. My first instinct was to rub my tired eyes, convinced it was a glitch. But the figure didn't disappear. Instead, it leaned closer to the camera, just enough that I thought I saw the gleam of an eye, wide, and reflecting the dim hallway light, like a cat's. I jerked upright, my chair scraping painfully loud against the linoleum. For a moment, I just stared, waiting for the image to shift or dissolve into static. But the thing, the person, it had to be a person, right? Stayed put. I forced myself to look away, grabbed my flashlight, and unlocked the office door with hands that refused to stay steady. I told myself this was what I was here for, after all. Security. If someone was wandering the halls, it was my job to find out who. The east corridor was colder than before, as if someone had left a window open down at the far end. But every room I passed was sealed tight, windows latched, vents closed. I called out again, louder this time, announcing myself, but my voice died in the thick hush. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, one bulb buzzing like a trapped wasp. I swept my light over doorways, the chipped walls, the peeling paint. Nothing. Nothing. No footprints on the floor's thin dust. No sign of anyone. I made it to the spot where the camera had shown the figure. Right outside an old patient room. The door was propped open a few inches with a battered wooden wedge, something I hadn't noticed on my first round. I hesitated, every part of me screaming to close it and walk away, but I edged closer, flashlight raised like a talisman. Inside, the room smelled faintly of mold and some sharp, chemical tang. There was a hospital bed, sheets stripped, and a heavy metal bedside table. On the wall opposite the window, someone had scrawled something in faded black marker. The words were warped, the letters trailing off, as if whoever wrote them was shaking. "Don't look in the glass." I backed out quickly, almost stumbling. My radio crackled at that exact moment, sudden and loud in the stillness. I grabbed at it, half expecting someone to speak, but all I got was static. Then, for just a heartbeat, a burst of whispering. So soft and layered, it didn't sound like words at all, more like the hiss of wind through long grass. Then, silence. My fingers were numb on the radio. I called for backup, but nothing came through. Either the batteries were dying, or the interference in this wing was too strong. I tried to steady myself, telling myself it was a prank, maybe a leftover from when the psych ward used to be down this hall. Still, I didn't go back inside that room. Instead, I made my way down the corridor, trying to ignore the way each shadow seemed to stretch toward me as I passed. My steps sounded muffled, like I was walking on thick carpet instead of hard tile. The air grew heavier, as if the wing itself was drawing breath, holding it. It was almost 2 a.m. when the next thing happened. I was halfway down the main corridor, double-checking that the stairwell door was secure, when my flashlight flickered out. The darkness was absolute for a moment, thick and suffocating. I fumbled for my phone, its screen providing a pale, weak glow. As I turned, I caught a glimpse in the glass window of the stairwell door, a reflection that shouldn't have been there. Behind me, just over my shoulder, something pale and long-limbed stood impossibly still, watching. I spun around, but the corridor was empty. Nothing there but the echo of my own movement, the flashlight in my fist trembling as if it belonged to someone else. The glass still trembled ever so slightly in the door, as though someone had been pressed up against it a moment before. My throat was too dry to call out again. I pressed my free hand to my chest, trying to slow down the erratic beat, and forced myself to look back at my reflection. This time it was only me. I told myself it had to have been a trick of the light, the way my phone's glow bounced in the glass. But the memory of those long, pale limbs, too long to belong to anyone, stuck in my mind like a thorn. I needed to get back to the office, to the monitors, to something normal and bright and real. I moved faster than I meant to, footsteps echoing sharp and quick. With every door I passed, I felt the urge to look over my shoulder, like there was something just out of sight, keeping pace. Always close, but never quite visible. The buzzing lights overhead seemed louder, the shadows at the end of the hallway thicker and more solid. When I reached the office, I almost dropped my keys trying to unlock the door. The monitors were still on, but the feeds had changed. All 4 screens showed the same looping stretch of empty hallway. The same segment repeated from a dozen angles, overlapping and out of sync, like the building was folding in on itself. For a few seconds I just stared, mouth open, willing the cameras to reset. for the images to line up. They didn't. I tried switching the feeds, even unplugged the monitor and plugged it back in, but the looping corridors remained. It looked like I could walk forever and never escape. A sound behind me, soft, deliberate, made me spin. It was the paper logbook, lying open on the desk, pages fluttering though there was no draft. My name was written there, but underneath, in shaky script, another entry had appeared. Still here. I stepped back, bumping into the filing cabinet. The whole room felt smaller, the ceiling lower, as if the walls were inching closer, quietly compressing. I pressed my palm to the cold metal, grounding myself, focusing on the texture of the chipped paint beneath my fingertips. I told myself again I was overtired, that old buildings did weird things to your head. But as I watched, the shadow in the furthest corner of the office seemed to pulse and thicken, like it was drawing itself up from the wall. I needed to leave. I grabbed my bag and headed for the main exit, forcing myself not to break into a run. The corridor stretched ahead, longer than I remembered, the floor slanting slightly downhill, as if I was moving deeper into the earth. I felt watched. More than that, I felt expected, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to notice something I'd missed. Halfway to the exit, the air grew heavy, pressing at my ears like I'd gone underwater. The lights flickered violently, then steadied, bathing everything in a waxy yellow. I hurried on, passing the surgery theater. This time, the sign on the door was gone. The old steel door stood open a sliver, just wide enough to see inside. I should have kept walking. I know that. But something pulled at me. I need to confirm, to prove that nothing was there. I pushed the door open with my foot, flashlight ready. The beam caught on gleaming chrome and dried stains on the floor that might have been rust, might have been something else. The room smelled like wet pennies, and something older, deeper, a scent that curled in the back of my throat. There was no one inside, but the shadows in the corners moved, thick,